Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I am Agina Nuruddin Little, Director of Learning, and I am thrilled you've joined us for today's session on Governance 101. This session will explore the core roles, responsibilities, and practices that help nonprofit boards thrive. We have a full agenda ahead, so let's get started. Please join me in welcoming today's facilitators, Marc Mannella and Sangeeta Tyagi, whose full bios are available in the chat. Marc is an independent consulting, working at the intersection of learning science and high performance, partnering with schools, nonprofits, and sports organizations. Sangeeta serves as Director of the Center for Youth and Communities, Director of the Institute for Economic and Racial Equity, and Senior Social Scientist at the Heller School at Brandeis University. Note that today's session will be recorded. Now join me in giving a warm virtual welcome to Marc and Sangeeta. Marc?
Thanks so much, Agina. And I'm really glad to be here today with everyone. I'm excited to talk about a topic that is near and dear to my heart, governance. The reason for that is I founded a charter school back many, many years ago, 2003, and had to build a board from scratch without ever really an understanding what a board was. Fast forward 16 years later, and now I'm actually serving on multiple boards, including one board that I'm the chair of. And I've given, therefore, a lot of thought to what excellent governance looks like. I've also seen it from lots of different angles, right? So as the executive director who A, built the board, B, managed it for 15 years, and then C, I've been rank and file board member, then D, I've been a chair. And so having seen it from all the angles, now in my executive coaching work that I do, especially the work that I do with nonprofit leaders, I get to see lots of different board engagements, lots of different interactions, ways that boards help and support and are incredibly useful, and then ways where maybe boards had an opportunity to be useful and didn't grab it for one reason or another. And so today our session is designed very specifically for whether you're an executive director, whether you're a board member, whether you're a board chair, whether you're someone on the governance committee who's thinking about how do I build a wonderful, or the nominating committee, how do I build a wonderful board, or you're thinking about how do I make the board maybe this much better, whether you're new to it, whether you've been doing it for 20 years, 30 years, we're trying to create something for everyone. And so without any further ado, I'm going to jump in and share some slides. And so right there, that should have worked. And what I'd like everyone to do is to, just in the chat right now, open that sucker up, type in your organization, your role, and how you'd answer the question, why did you feel compelled to join us today? I think it would be a really interesting thing to hear from people. You get a lot of emails that come across the transom, right? You chose to be here. We're grateful. Why? All right, it's starting to come in. So once you've hit send, make sure you read what our colleagues and friends are sharing. People launching boards, people who already serve on them, who are trying to get a refresher. What's jumping out to you, Sangeeta? Anything?
Yeah, just people who've been on boards for a while, and then people who are transitioning roles on boards.
Great. I love it. Evolving my board into a stronger governing board. That boards undergo evolutions. Thank you for sharing that. The idea that, the board that you need as an early stage nonprofit when you have 5 employees versus when you're a board that has 300 of a nonprofit or a for-profit, a nonprofit that's 300 employees and has to raise $30 million next year. Those are not the same board. You have very different needs, right? And so trying to talk to as much of it as we can. This is great. Thank you for your contributions here. And as we keep going, if you're not quite finished, we'll hit send, and then in the interest of time, we're gonna get moving here. So as Sangeeta and I were planning this, we said, look, we're calling it Governance 101. So we know people are going to want some 101 level stuff, right? But we also wanted to keep this conversational. We did not want this to be a lecture from Marc and Sangeeta about how to do it, right? Well, there's a lot of wisdom in this room. I can tell from some of the people in here that I know. I can tell from some of these responses. We've got a lot of wisdom. And so we wanted to pull this wisdom into the group so that everybody can benefit from it. And the best way to do that is to have some conversation. And so we did put a pre-read together. We also know that how busy everyone's lives are. And so James has just posted the pre-read in the chat, which is great. So if you hadn't had a chance to access it yet or look at it, or you didn't, go old school and print it like the old guy on the screen, that's fine. You can click it here. I'm also going to run through it relatively quickly to honor the people who did the pre-work, but also to embrace the people who have busy lives and didn't get a chance to. I'm going to go through it really quickly before we move into our first activity. So this very first prompt here asks us to consider the notion of what is the role of the board of a nonprofit corporation, right? And you'll see this in all the literature, whether you're looking at board source, whether you purchase a book, whether you're talking to somebody, especially if you're talking to an attorney about board service, they'll sort of immediately go to, well, there are three duties, right? These three duties include the duty of care. So it's our job to make sure that, in essence, we're taking care of the nonprofit. The duty of loyalty, right? We cannot be in this to advance our own agendas. We have to be in this to advance the mission. And then duty of obedience. It is the board's job to make sure that whatever the guidelines are, the guardrails are, that the entity is staying inside of them. Okay, and so again, there's more here. I've got the source for this. So if you're fascinated about this and want to go deeper, you can click the link. But that's when people say, so like, what does the board do? Like, that's the answer in the most sort of like straightforward terms. Okay, I like this framework, which comes from a book about actually school governance. I have a school background, so maybe that's why I'm attracted to this. But this idea that a strong board has three mindsets that they're taking on. They have a fiduciary responsibility, and that's the one that everybody talks about, this word fiduciary, which really we're just talking about oversight, right? Making sure that the board is aware of what's happening, and that therefore those duties are being sort of followed through on in the present tense. That matters, right? Also, the best boards are also looking ahead. They're looking around quarters. They're trying to be strategic, apply some foresight. Maybe they're involved in strategic planning, 5-year plans, 10-year plans. Maybe they're just asking the right question that says, okay, so our cash flow looks okay right now, but what happens in 8 months when XYZ we know is going to happens? How do you overlay the thing we know is going to happen on top of our cash flow? Are we going to run out of money, right? Like asking that question, maybe that's the thing that's going to unlock a really important insight with enough time to do something about it. Who knows? And then this idea of generative, which is always a little tricky for the executive, right? When a board member comes to me and says, hey, I've got this great idea. And something that a board member once said to me was, have we ever thought about writing to Microsoft to see if they would donate a bunch of laptops for the kids? Heart was in the right place. I didn't really know how to explain that Microsoft is a little more on the software side than the hardware side. Didn't know how to explain that of the hundreds of thousands of schools in the country, probably, I don't know why Microsoft might pick ours, right? So like, there's a bit of a trap here where when the board member comes in with just like random ideas, but there's also a real important role here for board members to be generating new ideas, to be applying maybe their expertise from a slightly different but related sector into the sector that this nonprofit is operating in. I never thought of it that way. It could be something that happens if we're also thinking about how do I add value with this? If the staff is stuck, how do we maybe help them as thought partner, as idea generators? So these three mindsets can be very useful for boards. Wouldn't be a board presentation if we didn't talk about governance versus management. You've seen some version of this, I'm guessing, a bunch of times. Put it in here, and really this idea of the headline I would say here is that there are very specific roles. We know that especially in small nonprofits, they can blur a little bit, sort of understood, and like there's a reality that comes in when I was running the school and we were in our first year and I had 5 employees and 90 kids and was running less than $1 million budget. Like, yeah, sometimes there were board members answering phones. that was, when my office manager called out sick, no one answered the phones unless somebody came in and helped and volunteered. Sometimes I was a board member. That is very still clearly those staff responsibility. And then there are other responsibilities that are very clearly board ones. Okay, I'm not going to read the slides to you out loud. You have it if this is of interest in a place where you want to dig deeper. And then I just kind of like these. I found this actually from like a healthcare system, I think, that was talking about like effective healthcare governance. But I love this construct and this idea of like this little checklist to ask yourself around board engagement. Is it big? Is it forward looking? Is it core to the mission? Is it a place where a policy is needed or either a modification or a new one? Is there big warning signs? Do we have a watchdog, whether that be the IRS, whether that be a potential like restricted grant? Is somebody watching? And then is the CEO calling us in? Like these 7 questions I think are really useful. And again, you have them here now, so we're not going to spend a ton of time with them. Where we are going to spend some time though is thinking about putting these to work. And so this is what I'm excited to do. What I did was I took 4 experiences that I had through my tenure here in my career. One of them, I was the executive director in an interaction with a board member where I had to figure out how to respond. One of which was, the other 3 were boards that I was on. One was the board where I was chair. 2 were just sort of like interactions I observed as a rank and file member. But there's 4 scenarios that we're going to put into a link in the chat. But we're not going to put it in there yet. James, don't put it in there yet because I want them to keep listening. Because if I give it to you now, you're just going to click on it and start reading and stop listening to me. So what we're going to ask you to do is we're going to put you into breakout rooms. Once you go into breakout rooms, you have to pay attention to the number of your room because you're not going to have time to discuss all 4 scenarios. You're going to be assigned one of the scenarios and you're going to unpack that scenario, right? What we're going to want you to do, and of course my little notes here fell asleep. What we're going to ask you to do is to answer the question about what would the ED or the board chair, depending on either your role or depending on the situation, what would the ED or the board chair do? What do you think they should do in this situation? And think also about how it might connect to some of the ideas we talked about in here. Like, is this board member leaking into the management side as opposed to the government side? Is this executive director providing all of the right information for the board to do their fiduciary responsibilities? Thinking about how it may connect to these concepts. You're going to have about 10 minutes to discuss them in breakouts, and then we're going to pull you back. And so be ready to share because the other groups haven't heard about your scenario yet. And so you're going to need we're going to need people to come back and share the scenario and then share what happened. So breakout rooms, pay attention to your room number because that's going to tell you what your scenario is. Discuss the scenario with a specific eye towards what should the ED or chair do? How does it connect to the pre-reads? And then be ready to share out. Sangeeta, did I forget anything?
Nope, all good.
All good. Any questions from the group? There we go, James. Beautifully timed, sir. Thank you. So you've got your scenarios there. We're going to set, once you've clicked on it, we're going to send you away. Nikki, looks like you're having trouble with your microphone, but not going to be able to participate. Thank you for letting us know. Hopefully we can figure it out, and if not, okay. Yeah, I think we are ready to take it away. Well, welcome back. I hope you had, I know it's probably a little bit compressed amount of time, always, right? Like when we're in a good conversation, it can be tricky to have the full conversation you want to have, but hopefully you got enough where you got into the conversation a bit. So I'm really excited to hear about how these conversations went. So I'm going to just share my screen again, since I know not everybody saw every scenario, and we're going to start with scenario 1. Scenario 1 was I was the executive director on this one. And, people like Richard Binswanger, who I see on the call, who know lots of people on my board from back in the day, maybe could even guess as to which board member it was who said this to me. But that's neither here nor there. We don't want to do that. And so here we go. Underperforming function, had a new hire who that was the plan to solve it. And we're still underperforming. And the board member says to the executive director, I don't really have a question. I have a statement. You got to fire that new director of outreach. So somebody from either group 1 or group 5 or group 9, so the groups that tackled this, really would love to hear you come off mute, you sort of jump in, not over, and share a little bit about the conversation that you had. How should the ED or the chair handle this, and how does this connect to our pre-reads?
I'll jump in right quick. My name is Tamika, representing Mighty Writers. Before my students come back in, I
Great.
am. Our group was Victor, Ann, and I have to say this name, Grace Kelly. Uh, that was part of my group, and we basically had questions. We had questions,
Mm,
a lot of questions. Basically, one that came up was having a conversation, a separate private conversation with the director of outreach to see maybe the performance level or the task at hand may need to be reduced because of personal things that's going on. Have there been any communications going on with the director of outreach to see if anything have changed? Also, there were questions on whether the ED had been having conversations with the director of outreach to see if the director of outreach were stated completely what the role would have been for that director of outreach. And I don't want to go too much time, but I want to speak fast before students came back in. But that was some of the things that came up. But I think we was on a consensus of not having the option of firing the director of outreach outright.
okay. So we got it goes. I think it goes without saying, like this is like an executive director focus. Like, is the executive director having these conversations, right? Not is the board member or the board chair, right?
Yes,
And ultimately, managing the staff is the responsibility of the executive, the
right.
paid professional that the board has hired to lead the nonprofit's efforts, right?
Yes.
And so for the board member to come in and say, you should take this particular management option, which would be a termination, is we would consider that to be overstepping the role of management versus governance. Now, I can tell you that I was reflecting as you all were in the breakouts, I was reflecting with the group that hung back. I actually don't remember exactly what I said in this moment. This was like 12 years ago, right?
Mhm.
And I want to believe that I said something more profound than buzz off. But I think what I would say if this were happening to me today was something along the lines of, we agree that something needs to change because it's not okay that these are the outcomes we're getting. Where we maybe don't agree is on exactly what action that I need to take. So let me explain what we're doing about these results, right? Like some version, like the board absolutely has a right to be concerned. The board
Mhm.
has a right to shine a spotlight on this issue. The board has a right to ask me questions as the executive about what it is that I'm doing to remedy the fact that we're not meeting this part of our objectives. The board does not have the right to say, you must fire this person that maybe I've never even met, right?
Mhm.
And so that's really on scenario number one. Sounds like this is the center of this conversation. I'm interested. Did anybody else have anything they wanted to add who discussed this one before we move on to scenario two?
So Mark, first, thank you for the shout out. And I can say
Offline, tell me who you think it was,
I
Richard.
I
Tell me
may
who you
guess,
think it was.
but I will tell people it wasn't me because Mark was smart enough to not put me on his board for sure.
There we go. There we go.
Um, I was agreeing completely. We came to the same conclusion. I think the thing that, from the board's perspective, it was how do we support the executive director in making the decision? You've already said we were asking, is there a plan, and how do we either support that plan, push back against that plan, ask the questions, were the goals right, like go through the whole thing to support the ED in making sure that whatever decision that they're making uh, is is one that is well thought through.
That's great, Richard. Thanks for sharing that. And you make me feel like maybe you should have been on that board now. So dang it. All right. Appreciate that. Anyone else want to come off mute and add something before we turn to number two? All right. Scenario number two. So this is a fun one. Fun isn't exactly right. But believe it or not, I was the board member who was holding the executive director's feet to the fire a little bit on this one. So I got an executive director telling me we're great. Everything's awesome. We never miss a fundraising goal. I got this huge pipeline. We're going to exceed our goal again. Marc, I need your names. I'd really love to hear how people address scenario two.
So I'll speak up for our little group. We basically had questions, both on the side of for the board member. Did the board member understand uh, the role, his or her role in the organization, and then the ED in approaching the board member in this way? Did the ED adequately flesh out why he or she is seeking that information when they've exceeded all the goals? So we were a little puzzled, and we were all from very small organizations that are at the beginning of this trajectory. So we were mostly puzzled, I would say, and not sure, but felt on both ends there was a lack of information and a lack of communication.
That's great. I appreciate the way you looked at that from both angles, Carla, and I think that you struck on a handful of things right there, all of which were probably at play, right? Did someone else want to add to that? I thought someone else came off mute, I thought.
Yeah, I'll add to that. We talked about in our group the importance of making sure that the board feels connected to the mission. You want to leverage your networks when you feel personally invested, and there's a hesitancy sometimes to leverage your networks when you're not quite there, especially if it's a newish board member. Um, we also talked about how this could be a really useful learning moment of sort of examining, well, like, what's your board orientation look like? What are your board expectations documents? When you're bringing on board members, are you setting that expectation? Like, part of this board is to leverage your network. Um, and and then also to be more explicit about, okay, well, the reason that we've met all of our goals is because we are constantly seeking to expand our donor base and needing to continue to expand our networks. I think it's really interesting how this read and then how you summarized it. I actually had a different reaction to I come from the executive director perspective. So when I read it, I was like, oh no, we got to be leveraging our networks. Like that was my but then when you
Yep.
said it and described it as, okay, give me your names, I had a different reaction, right? Because part of being able to leverage your network has to come from the person who is at the center of that network, right? So when I, as an executive director, ask my board to leverage their networks, I'm not saying, hey, can you go ask your mom and your aunt? And because I don't hold those relationships, you do. So you should also still maintain control over how you're leveraging your networks. That should not be up to the executive director.
Yeah, that's great. Lindsay, I appreciate that, and yeah, I guess I could have maybe done a different job of wording this to make some to convey some of the nuance that I was feeling. But on the board side, I think there were a couple things I was feeling. One, this was I felt like a very invulnerable executive director who was sometimes always like there was nothing was ever wrong. Like everything was always so positive and so great, and like, oh my gosh, like we're the best. And so a little bit, I was like, well, you're fine. What am I? Well, you don't need me. So there was a little bit where I was sort of like trying to prove a point. I also had a concern because of the way that it was being handled pretty transactionally. And frankly, I had heard from other board members that they had given names and those people weren't stewarded in a way that they were comfortable with. So I think the thing, and the thing that I want to make sure that all the executive directors here is when you're asking a board member, whether it's for an introduction or for a name, there's an expectation about how my mom, how my college buddy, who is now a very philanthropic and generous, how these people are going to be treated, what their experience is going to be like, right? And when it's a very transactional experience, when I find out that the staff of the nonprofit isn't following through, emails are going unreturned. I'm confused about when this event is that they asked me to buy a table for. Like when that stuff is happening, then you're going to make your board members really question whether they're going to divulge those contacts and whether they're going to make those introductions. So I think there's a duty of care on the side of the board. We've discussed that. There's also an obligation the school has to do a really professional. I said school. The nonprofit has to do a really professional job. Sangeeta, would you add anything, or would anyone else want to throw in before we go to scenario 3?
I'll be quick, real quick. I think
Great.
after getting a little understanding of the scenario, that this is a great opportunity for the ED to teach the board member and or at least connect in terms of like just interdependency. Like, I understand that my network got us this far, but your network can excel us to newer heights, or et cetera, et cetera. So just touching base on just like interdependency, like my manager and my role model and mentor Hakeem, he has a network, but I also have my personal network that I've been working with and we've been working with to excel our mission further. So I think just being able to work together is the most important part in this lesson.
That's great, Reginald. Thank you. And I can tell you that where we ended up here was I made some introductions to local elected officials because they were having a problem with a crossing where there was a stop sign and they wanted a red light, but they had never been introduced to anybody who could actually do something like help a stop sign turn into a red light. And so I actually ended up making some connections, not on the philanthropy side, but still showing that I was like a dedicated board member. But it was through that partnership. And it was through the fact that I actually knew that this was an issue that this place was having where they were concerned about traffic in front of their building. And I gave philanthropic connections later when they actually needed it. Okay, transitioning to scenario 3. Thank you, everybody. These are great. Okay, here we go. So on this particular one, there's been an RFP that's been released into the world. There's a board member who says they don't believe the way that the RFP is handling sort of racial diversity issues, the commitment to diversity inclusion not being a sufficient consideration. And so asks the question of the staff member, gets an answer they don't love, turns to the executive director and says, is it too late to change the application? Love to hear about this conversation.
When asked, it's a really great time to have a conversation about it so that the board and the staff can get on the same page about alignment towards values. So if the question is asked, did you consider race? And the CEO is like, no. There's a lot to be curious about there, given what our mission is, given what our stated values are. It's like, oh, in a way that doesn't put them on the spot. Like, can we talk about maybe in the future integrating that into future RFPs? Because as you know, and what we do, this is what we're about. It's interesting that it wouldn't also apply to our hiring practices. Now, turning to the ED and saying like, is it too late? Like that is not the way that I would handle that if I were the board member. But given that it's important for all the different levels of board members that are there, new people, veteran people, it's a good conversation to have out loud and in real time to reestablish and remind folks we value this. This is important to us. And then for new people to see that that we really mean it. And we can have these hard conversations.
Thank you for that, Alice. That was incisive and really grateful for you jumping off mute there. Good to see you. I'm wondering, is the structure of an RFP something that a board would have jurisdiction over, or is this a staff management decision? Not just for Al's, like, just what do we think about that? Does the board get to weigh in on wording of an RFP?
I think it depends on some boards. For example, if you've got a committee on the board, let's say you've got an audit committee on the board, right? And we're looking for new auditors. That is done at the board level, not at the management level. So it depends.
So let's just add the color. So this was a construction project and they were bidding out the architecture firm.
That's management. That's not board.
Is there a way that the board could have influence on this if they care about it deeply? Julia, you came off mute.
Yeah, so I think that one, it would depend on the organization. If property is not their area of expertise, I think the board could potentially lend a helpful eye to that. To me, in the COO's plans to release that RFP, I would hope that they kind of planned for that board engagement prior to completing or putting out the RFP, so that then there is that little bit of flexibility. And I think making it clear that ultimately it's going to be the decision of the organization, but given that maybe, bidding out for this property or doing something is slightly outside of the expertise of the organization, and we potentially have some expertise on the board about that, I think it's like an okay thing to want to seek their opinion. I think the timing and the way in which that is done is what starts to get fuzzy in this scenario.
Yeah, I think fuzzy. I think it depends. I think this is a fuzzy one, right? I will say this on our pre-read, we saw board gets to set policy. And there is a world where the board could create a policy that says all the RFPs go out, consider the race of the vendors, or consider whether they're an underrepresented group, or however they want to frame that, right? If that's a policy that the org has, that is policy set at the board level, yeah, that's within their jurisdiction. But I'll use I'll use the word wordsmith, a piece of work that is being driven by staff, no, and especially not an individual board member. So I think that's the other piece here that we haven't touched on yet that matters. The board as a whole, as an entity, is the manager of the executive, not the COO, the executive. One individual board member may not like the way that we do something. They have the right to voice that. They have the right to call to ask for a vote. But they don't have the right to unilaterally say, I'm on the board and you have to do this. And I think the last note I'll make, which it was heard in all of what Julia, Mary, and Elle said, ideally, the board and the executive are working hand in hand to the point that this was actually discussed well before it got into this meeting.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's maybe the biggest lesson here for us is what is that relationship between the executive and the chair? What does it look like to prepare for the meeting? How are we making sure that we're walking hand in hand? All right. I'm looking at time. We're a minute or two over. Sangeeta, do we think we have a minute or two to touch on at least number 4, or should we save number 4 maybe for another time? Okay. Well, we'll go after number 4. Thank you, everyone. Yeah. Last one. This is a public event that is being held by the nonprofit. A board member attends with her family. She realizes that there are security guards, paid security. Feels like it is not in line with the energy that this particular nonprofit wants to have at their public events. Asks the executive about it. The executive says, we've had problems in the past, and staff felt like they really needed this kind of support. Hi, Michelle. How are you?
I'm doing well. So I really feel like this is more so it falls under management versus governance, because it's a safety concern. And I would say in the planning of the event, it could have been something that was brought up, but if it's not something that's in policy, then again, it would be something that the board member has the right to speak on. But not necessarily the right to say, hey, this needs to align with the message that we're trying to send. If it's something that's a safety concern for everyone, I would say it's more that it's a management and not a board governing type deal.
Thank you for that, Michelle. Very well said. Does anyone have anything they want to add to what Michelle offered?
And I was in the discussion with Michelle as well. And one thing we just kind of noticed in the text was the board member didn't mention that they disagree with the decision. The staff mentioned that they wanted this. The ED must have agreed. While there seems to be a lack of communication there, the optics was, what the board member was worried of. So we were saying that this is something that, maybe in the next meeting, the follow-up meeting, you'll go over in more detail, but it seems like everyone may have been on the same page. Just it was executed without, proper communication. Or even just the way it was done, because it was more so the optics, not necessarily that they didn't agree that there was a need for it. It really was just, the messaging, I guess.
Yeah, that's great, Hakeem. Thank you. I will say, being in the room when this was handled, I thought our executive handled it really well. She basically sort of unemotionally, the board member was a little emotional, a little heightened. She did a brilliant job. She sort of diffused it. She was like, well, let me explain to you how we came to this decision. And she said some version of, we can't go back in time, but looking forward, if like there are other solutions that we have that you can offer, let's talk it through. But I'm asking staff to come in and do this. They're telling me they're unsafe. This is what we decided. And then the board chair came in and was like, we had actually talked about this. So it was this one board member who wasn't in the loop, but the chair and the executive director came to the conclusion together that it was the right move. And the way that we sort of pulled her into, like, do you have ideas? I shouldn't say we, I was just observing. The way that that board member was pulled in said, do you have ideas for what else we could do? Because if my staff's not safe, like, that's not something that I'm okay with. So I think that was an example of something that was handled really well. Michelle, you wanted to add something?
Yes, I would say just adding for like I've seen like in the past through the work that we've done is it's not so much they have to be like, hey, your shirt says security or you're fully armed. You can have something that's, plain, like a more plain outfit, but then it still shows that you're there in a security type role, but not like shown front facing shown.
Right. And that's a great example, Michelle, of a board member who, if that had come up in the meeting, which it didn't, that would be like that generative mindset, right? It was like, hey, let's problem solve this together. Okay, thank you. This was wonderful. I really appreciated everyone's engagement. And without any further ado, I'm going to turn over to Sangeeta for the second piece of our presentation. Sangeeta?
Okay, so thank you everybody for your engagement. We want to pivot now to hearing from two executive directors and a board president from organizations that are within the Spring Point Partners Network. These are two very different organizations, different sizes, different missions, but both deeply rooted within the communities of which they are a part. And both with, I think, much to teach us about the ongoing work of building and sustaining strong management board relationships. You have the bios for all the speakers, so I'm not going to go through those right now, but welcome Dan and Maitreyi and Marc, who are going to join us now. So, all right. We need Dan. There we go. Welcome, everybody. Thrilled to be on this in this conversation with you. So I'm going to start with just a very straightforward question to Maitreyi and to Dan. In a few sentences, tell us about how many board members, so size of board, backgrounds that they bring to the board, and generally average tenure of your board members. Maitreyi?
Great. Thank you, Sangeeta. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with all of you. I've already learned so much, so this is actually really fun. I'm the ED of Bartram's Garden, which is a public space and historic landmark, national historic landmark in Southwest Philadelphia, about 50 some acres. Our board by bylaw is no more than 30, but we've come to a sweet spot of maybe like 20, 21 people generally. And their terms are they roll over every 3 years, and we can have them stay for 2 terms, after which they have to cycle off. Largely because we are stewards of a public space that is actually owned by the city, we work closely with the City of Philadelphia, Parks and Recreation Department, and they have a board member on our board as well. So that's like required by bylaw. And over the last, I've been at the organization now for the last 14 years. And one of the things that I'm really amazed by is actually the sort of the life of the board within the organization and the changes that we've gone through as the organization itself has grown, and we've sort of reached out in terms of uh, bringing on board members for particular things that we needed to accomplish. So that kind of ecosystem within the organization of the board, I think nurturing that has been a really big part of the work that we've all been doing together.
Thank you. Thanks, Maitreyi. Dan, how about the Hopeworks board? How many tenure and what are their backgrounds?
Sure. Great to be here, everyone. Really excited to chat. So at Hopeworks, we're an organization that uses the power of social enterprise, market-based businesses, training, trauma-informed care to move folks from chronic unemployment into life-changing jobs. To do that, we have a group of 13 board members that really have a huge mix, including Hopeworks alumni, industry executives, technologists, as well as folks that span a variety of industries and expertise. When we recruit folks, we really look for what does Hopeworks need to grow? And so we have folks like Marc who are retired executives. We have finance professionals. We have legal professionals. And then we have technologists as well. So we're really lucky to have the group. When you think about terms, by bylaws, folks at Hopeworks board can serve 3 consecutive 2-year terms. 3 times 2 is 6 years. Overwhelmingly, our board members stay the full term, typically.
That's great. That's great. I should just mention to people listening in that as you're listening to the speakers, please be thinking about, what stands out for you, what reminds you of your board, what is one thing that the conversation is making you think about changing as you go back. So we'll have that discussion after we finish our conversation with the speakers. Thank you. Thanks, Dan. So, one of the most common concerns that I think we all hear about between management and governance, executive directors and boards is about a sort of a lack of consistent engagement from their boards, right? So, Dan, tell us a little bit about what does consistent engagement look like for you and at Hopeworks, and how do you both create it and sustain it over a period of time?
You bet. And full disclosure, what I'm going to share is my opinion. Does that make sense? Which not everyone agrees with. I think when I think about engagement, it is first important to define what good board engagement is not necessarily. Because when I think of board engagement, I think of what are the things that only a board member can do. So what that means is when board engagement is not making me feel good, I have a dog for that. Also, board engagement is not showing up at events, although I hope they do. And it is not making intros, although I hope they do. Because the fact is, lots of other people can do those things. To me, board engagement is helping Hopeworks solve the biggest problem it's facing and helping me see mistakes I'm making or helping the organization see the things that they don't see. Because the fact is, and Marc taught me this, if you think about the board of directors, the shareholders of Hopeworks is not me. That's not who the board's working for. And it's not even Hopeworks, the organization. The board of Hopeworks works for the young adults we serve, which means that is what a board engagement means. It has to be something that drives results for our young adults forward. So how do we try to do that? And a board director taught me this. You come to the board meeting. It is not board engagement to read a report or to listen to me talk about a report. It is board engagement for me to present the biggest problems the organization is facing to a group of smart people who have committed to the organization, read the financials, know what's going on, and then problem solving with them. And my experience is when board members are asked to bring their expertise and their best selves to really move the needle on things that are hard, yeah, they're going to buy the table too. Yeah, they're going to make the donation. Yes, they're going to make introductions because they believe in the organization, but that's not board engagement. Board engagement is How can we do what we're doing better? And I think that's the critical definition for me.
Nice. That's great, Dan. Thank you for sort of reframing that for us. So, are there specific strategies that you're using consciously to create that engagement and deepen it?
I think what we try to do first is the board meetings is that problem solving space.
Mhm.
This is where every board meeting, hey, here are the one or two things that we're struggling with that we're really working on. Help us do it. And the other part of the board meeting is, hey, at the last board meeting, here was the advice we heard. Here's what we did with it. And to that point about boundaries, that doesn't mean that everything the board says the staff is going to do. But you got 13 of the smartest people we've met, folks that are the only folks in the room that are not getting paid to spend all this time and energy on Hopeworks. Does that make sense? They're qualified to help you solve those problems. I think so. The two key things are ask with transparency,
Mhm.
follow up, say what happened, and just remember, the board. Yes, the board's role is to evaluate me at the end of the fiscal year, but that is not their most important job. The reason they evaluate me is to make sure that the organization is serving their real bosses, which is our young adults. And I see too often sometimes executive directors, including me, get a little caught up in, I hope they think I'm doing a good job. Actually, a good board should always be thinking I could be doing better because otherwise they're not serving our young adults.
Mhm. Great. Thanks, Dan. Something to come back to in our discussion. Maitreyi, I'm going to turn to you. As you worked with your board and you have a large board, what would you say matters the most in terms of building mutual trust and accountability? Two things that actually go together. So mutual trust and accountability between you as the chief executive and your board. So again, similar question. What does that look like in practice? And what are some key strategies for building and sustaining trust and accountability?
Those are great questions, Sangeeta. Thank you. I feel like the rhythm of communication between a board chair and me and my role as ED is vital to building that trust and that relationship. And by that I mean not just prepping for the board meeting, but having a sort of a relationship where there's opportunity to as Dan has said, problem solve, set the agenda, and so on. And one of the things I hold very deeply in terms of building that trust is sort of no surprises, uh, even good or bad, with my board chairs, so that we are constantly thinking of who needs to know this information and what is sort of the importance of finding a solution together and so on. So we have over the last few years really grown as an organization. So managing growth has been a big part of our ongoing sort of exchange with each other as board chairs and the executive committee and so on. And in that process, I think really engaging their minds, their extraordinary hearts and their minds to helping advance the mission of the organization and helping solve challenges that I have that I know I can't take care of myself. And it's uh, it's my, my finding my own courage to sort of share very openly what the challenge is. And then my expectation is the engagement that we will work on positively together to solve the problem, that it's ours to address. And so I think that constant communication and engagement about the issues that we're facing at the garden, the issues we're facing and around visitation and so on are those that I think keep the relationship honest and routine in some ways, but really keep the communication going. The other thing that I feel really excited about is when we're shaping board agendas, is to really spend maybe a short amount of time on looking back, but spend most amount of time looking forward. So what are we doing together to kind of map out things that are happening, projects, capital projects that are going on, and things like that, that we're looking at sort of setting direction rather than looking back at how many things we've already done, how many reports, like which committee met and what they did, etc. And I think that engagement in the future is what keeps everybody sort of really excited about the present and giving their best contribution. I think that formula has worked well, especially since we've grown. I think when I first started, our budget was about 800,000 a year. We're now at about 4.5 million or so. Our staff has grown from 8 full-time staff to about 40 now. And during COVID, the role of green spaces and cultural landscapes just exploded. And so solving our sort of issues that we faced during COVID is we were hand in hand. And there was not a day we closed the garden because we felt that people needed to be in safe outdoor spaces. And so that to me was like a hand in hand engagement with our board, making sure that we were doing things in addressing the threats of COVID, but also making sure that our staff stayed safe and so on. So those types of engagements, I think, really brought the best out in all of our board members and gave them sort of a stake in the future of the garden. And they've come at it from all perspectives: public health. There's a whole bunch of artists in the mix. I have a lot of design professionals on our board, lawyers, of course, financial, experts and so on. But the idea of all of them working together around these issues has really set a good collaborative atmosphere.
Great. It's interesting. You're both highlighting the role of problem solving together, right? So, Marc, I'm going to turn to you. Thank you for joining us as Hopeworks board president. But say a little bit about how you see your role vis-a-vis Dan's role. How are you supporting his leadership in concrete ways? And where do you find yourself spending the most time and attention in terms of your board oversight?
Well, thanks for having me. And I would start by saying, it's a singular honor for me to be working with Hopeworks. It's a fantastic organization. I'm very proud to be involved with it. And I'm passionate about what Hopeworks does. Hopeworks gets young people from very tricky situations into jobs, and they do it like a machine. So it is something I'm very proud to be involved with. But when we think about the relationship between the board and the ED and the executive team, I used to, I'm retired now, but I used to be the chief executive of both public and private companies. And we use as a model a kind of combination in our mind, at least I do, of what the board's role is, being partially like that of a public company and partially like that of a nonprofit. And some of the things are very common. Some of the things are common across both types of boards. For example, Dan and his team run the railroad. Dan and his team are the people running the show. On the other hand, and we are not. But on the other hand, we are responsible for the success of Dan and his team. So if they don't win, then we must have failed. It's so we have to give Dan and his team the opportunity to be successful. And it's not enough for us to say, well, we told him to do that and we told him to do that and he didn't do it. And so that, that's no help. So the way that we frame it is that we want to be part of the team. We want to be useful. And the question that we always ask each other is this useful to Dan and his team? Are they better off? Are they more likely to get more young people into jobs if we do this than if we don't? And stating the obvious, all of those of you who are EDs and work as executives in nonprofits know this. You have a lot of constituencies that you have to deal with. The board should not be a constituency. The board is part of the team. The board is on the same side as you are against all the other constituencies. And so we must view it like that, and we do. You asked what specific things that I would say that what tangible, concrete things have we done? Um, as a frame for that, one of the things that I haven't heard mentioned, I'm sure it may have been mentioned earlier in the discussions, is that one of the challenges of being the boss of anything, to be the ED or CEO or whatever, is you don't have a boss. That's a challenge because it means you have nobody to bounce ideas off. You have nobody who can say, wait a minute, have you considered this and considered that? Which everybody else does. And so one of the jobs of the board is to be that, is to be the person or people or group or method of providing a feedback function for the person in charge. And that we take that very seriously. And I heard some of the discussion about whether that should be involved in the design of an RFP or whether that should be involved in, but the question is where can it be helpful? And I think in my view that there are several areas where it can be of value. And I think the ones I would point to are strategy. Strategy is very important. And the way I think about strategy is not that the board creates the strategy, but that when Dan and his team create the strategy, they are sure that they're going to have a heck of a stress test when they present it to the board, because the board is going to push back really hard on every assumption and every conclusion. Not to catch out Dan or not to say, don't do that strategy, do my strategy, but to make sure the strategy is robust as it can be. And the second, and in a similar vein, the budget. I always think the budget is the first year of the strategy. So the budget has to go through that same level of rigor. And Dan and his team have grown the numbers with their organization very substantially. Sounds like Maitreyi, you have too. But it becomes more and more challenging. And there are a lot of money coming in and a lot of money going out, and it has to be really, really managed well. And where to put our money for the greatest value is an important stress test. So I think that's another one where the board can really help. And the other one, which I think in some ways is possibly the most important, but certainly very important, is the recruitment and the retention and the development of key people. That as organizations grow, making sure that the team that runs it is as strong and as well placed as possible and is developed and is growing is very real. And so that's something too where I think we can provide value. And then from time to time, and this was mentioned earlier, I think that there are members of our board who have great expertise in different areas. And so it would make absolutely sensible for them to help in their area of expertise, even if only, again, as a sounding board, in maybe them on their own. But that is sort of a ad hoc, as needed, as appropriate basis. And so in order to do that, two of the things that we have done to make sure that we're being as helpful to this as we can is that Dan mentioned the importance of the board meetings and how we prepare and structure them. It's important, I think, that the board members be at the board meeting, so that's a big deal. But secondly, that the executive team be at the board meeting so that everybody can hear everybody else. And there needs to be a level of candor and trust that people all know we're on the same team. We all know we're trying to do, but that doesn't mean everybody agrees with everybody all the time. Dan is going to make the decision, but it's important that he and his team have heard, counter arguments in order to make the decision. And that's important. And the other one is the use of the committees. The committees can play a really powerful role and be actually very useful, but they have to be proactive, they have to be engaged, and they have to be fully informed about what they're working on. But anyway, one last thing though that is just a hobby horse of mine, but I believe is very important, is that in any board, whether it's non-profit or profit company, the idea that somebody from the outside can come in and listen to a presentation for 10 minutes and know better how to do it than the person who's presenting it is preposterous. The person who's spending their life doing this job is much better informed, much more wrapped up in it than the wise person coming from the outside. So the wise person doesn't come and give advice and say, you shouldn't do that, you should do this. The wise person asks questions that challenge and test. And then the individual who's presenting can decide whether they want to modify their opinion or not. But it's up to them. They don't have to convince the board member. They only have to convince themselves.
Thanks, Mark. Thank you so much. I was actually going to ask what advice you have for people who are aspiring board members, but you actually just wove that into your question and your answer. So thank you. Thank you for that. Mark, I know that we want to open this up so that our people who are on this call can talk to the speakers. So let's do that. I'm going to actually hold off on, um, any more sort of questions from me. I'd like to hear from the group, so that we stay on time and on schedule. Um,
Sounds great.
there were questions that we sort of asked you all to consider, and please feel free to talk to our speakers about what's happening with your boards and how are you feeling about it, and what has struck you in this conversation as you think about your boards.
I put a question in the chat that I'd actually would love to maybe flesh out verbally instead. So I was struck, Dan, with what you were saying about, thought partnership and problem solving, and that is the best use of the board. And then all the other things you hope the board will follow after they feel engaged and sort of brought into the fold. And I think that that is exactly right. And also, I'm an executive director, and so one of the challenges that I sometimes hit up against is there's a few members of my board who love having strong feelings about things that are not within their purview. And so I want to find a way to invite them in this beautiful way, while also maintaining, not inviting them in to overstep. And it's a little bit of like a cultural question too, of how we build that culture of let's invite you in and just like know that might not do all the things that you suggest. And I'm just curious if you can sort of speak to that a little bit.
I'll share my opinion, and I think actually Marc will have some things. So I've learned from Marc too. I think two things is that first, when people want to share opinions, it's because they profoundly care. So like that's the important part. I think the second thing is asking your board for help without adding context is like asking one of my teenage daughters what they want for dinner. This conversation is not going to end well. Does that make sense? One of the things that I've learned is there's a big difference between being like, hey, we have some problems, we need help, as opposed to here's our key challenges. How do we integrate AI to get more young adults into jobs? We currently are looking at this or this. I think this is the right choice. Pressure test it. Boom. Does that make sense? And as Marc said, the board is not going to know more than me or my team about how to work with young adults getting jobs, but they are going to bring vast experience to Dan. I see the plan there. However, you're being far too optimistic on those sales targets. Hey, I'm curious if you have the staff to do the thing that you just said. You know about young adults. I ran a company where we grew 10x. I can tell you, you don't have the staffing you need. Does that make sense? So, and then that passionate person can give you advice in their area of expertise, but you got to structure it in a way where you have time for the conversation and you ask a clear question. That is not, what should we do? It's, I want to do this. This is how I think I'm going to do it. I'm being a little funny. Make me cry a little bit, like pressure test it, right? And I'll turn over to Marc because I think I've learned a lot from Marc about how to do that, but hopefully that's how I find it really helpful.
I used to tell my team when I was running a company, I used to say to them that as we go into board meetings, I say, listen, everybody, for God's sake, don't anybody ask for any advice. If we get some advice, we're going to have to do it. And so, but I was being a bit, but I mean, really, my point was that random people giving you passionate advice for 15 minutes is really depressing. I think there's a couple of things about it, though. I think one is that Dan and I are quite a good tag team, and you need to control time. You need somebody to be able to say, excellent, I think I've got the point, and now we have to cut that off because we have to move on, or I think so-and-so has a counterpoint. So I think that it's hard, but you do need to do that. You have to allow them to speak, but then you have to be able to stop them. But the other thing, which I think is I absolutely agree with Dan's main point, which is that the executive should show up with their perspective and why. But the other thing that is the hardest of all, but I think the most valuable, is to have a honorable disagreement where people can candidly say, I don't think that's right, actually. I think this is the way it should be. And therefore Dan and his team can hear the two arguments of why the one person thinks that and the other person thinks this. And ideally, that's the best, because then you've really, really stress tested your idea. But you do need somebody to be able to control the time, because otherwise it does run away with you.
and I'll just jump in and then I'll be quiet, like talk about controlling time. Marc has really helped us. We have historically had a board that felt great about everything. Does that make sense? And was much less helpful than a board where Marc and other folks have said, we need to have productive disagreement in the board meeting. We need to have those conversations. And as a result, it's a much more robust conversation.
Mhm. Mhm. Other questions, comments, thoughts? There are some in chat.
Looks like Margaret has her hand raised also, Sangeeta.
Margaret?
Yeah, I so appreciate both of these examples. And both of you all are long-standing EDs, and in Dan, in your case, you're a founding ED. So this board that you've created is the board that you've created. I wonder if you can speak to how this would be different if you inherited a board, or how you developed the kind of rapport that you and Marc clearly have developed over time and through experience when new EDs come in and they get what they get and they might get upset, right?
Well, and I'll just quickly correct. I wish I was a founding ID. That was actually Father Jeff Putoff, actually, who Marc knew, actually. Marc actually has been involved with Hopeworks longer than I am.
Well, I give you too much credit then, Dan. I take it back.
I can't take credit. I just watered the plant.
Yeah.
So, Maitreyi, I'll let you answer first, but I just wanted to make sure that was for folks who know Hopeworks. I don't want to take credit for for starting the thing.
Maitreyi, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, the organization I work for is over 100 years old, so I'm definitely not a founder. I think when I started, it was the board was very well-meaning and more of a sort of a network of folks from Center City, largely all white, and not quite necessarily understanding sort of what it means to have this incredibly historic space in a largely Black neighborhood. And yet they knew that we weren't really functioning as a public garden as we should. And so they knew that there was an issue, and I think found themselves at a loss. So when I was when I was interviewing for the job, I did say that I think this is a really extremely sort of stranded, it's a hugely stranded asset, these 50 acres in the heart of a community that has very little nature around anywhere else, around in the rest of the neighborhood. And they agreed and they said, what would you do about it? And I said, well, first, I would like to see more diversity in the board. And how many of you are truly ready for this level of community engagement in a neighborhood that none of you have really thought about very much in your board life? And they were startled, but I think slowly realized that some of them needed to sort of do what I believed was the right thing, was to actually end their terms and leave. And it allowed us to recruit people from the neighborhood, recruit people of certain talents, including, engage with the neighborhood to find out what their aspirations were for the garden. And from going to initially people telling me, oh, that's a private estate, you don't know what you're talking about, we're not welcome there, to now having a board that has strong representation from the neighborhood, from the community. I think that change really came out of, I think, what Dan had mentioned, people really believing in the mission of the space and realizing that they needed to either invest heavily in things that they hadn't done before, like get to know the neighborhood, get to know folks in the neighborhood, figure out like how this is going to be a real resource and a outdoor classroom, if you will, for the community. And through that process, the board has changed. And one of the things that I feel like we need to, I'm constantly in conversation with my board chair, is who else are we bringing on? Like, who's the next chair? Who's the next advancement chair? Who's the next finance chair, who's the next governance chair, so that there's a constant conversation that these are not permanent roles in the organization, that we need we need new blood, new energy coming in, and that one of the best gifts they can give is their talent and their experience, and then make room for others.
Thank you. Thanks, Maitreyi. I know this is a conversation that I feel like has just begun, not one that's at 3:25 p.m. So I want to thank you all. Thank you to the speakers for participating and just for sharing your wisdom on this. I think there's probably more questions that we could take, but I'm going to turn this over to Agina.
Yes, thank you so much, Sangeeta. What a great conversation. Just learned so much. So thank you all so much for joining us today and for engaging so thoughtfully in this conversation. A big thank you to Marc and Sangeeta, Dan, Marc, and Maitreyi for sharing their expertise and insights with us. And another special thanks to our partners at Witty Gritty for helping us with today's events. I hope you're leaving today with new perspectives and tools you can bring back into your work. We'll be sending a follow-up email with the presentation and additional resources, so please keep an eye out. Before we wrap up, as we always do, please take a moment to complete a very short survey. Your feedback helps us improve and shape future offerings. We truly appreciate your time. So if you can pull out your phones, click on that QR code and complete that survey. Thank you so much in advance. Lastly, I want to highlight our upcoming learning session for all of our partners and non-partners. Our next session, Navigating the Storm, a landscape analysis of the nonprofit sector and actionable tools for resilience, will take place on Thursday, March 26th from 1 to 2:30. Led by Dr. Alicia Smith Arriaga of the Center for Effective Philanthropy. The session will explore key nonprofit challenges and what they mean for leadership, governance, and financial planning. So, in closing, what matters most isn't just what we've explored today, it's how we carry it forward. Thank you for being a part of this learning community today. We look forward to seeing you at an upcoming session. Have a wonderful afternoon, everyone.
Thank you, Agina. Thank you, everybody, for being here today.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Everybody.